In this video, we are going to discuss the various challenges for sustainable energy development. As you all know, the pathway towards a sustainable energy future is not very obvious. There are many options to take, but with these options come a number of challenges, and we need to address first these challenges in order for us to really understand which direction we are going to go in order to attain a sustainable energy dream. So the first one would be on the availability of the necessary resources or resource limitation. So basically, it depends the resources. The ability of this resource depends on the nature and the extent of the resource, as well as the existence of a viable technology to utilize the resource. It doesn't mean that once the resource is widely available, doesn't automatically mean that that resource is easy to extract or easy to harness, because unless you have that technology to harness that resource, then it's better for the overall technology. Like for example, the nature and extent of the resource example is solar and wind. Solar and wind are widely available, let's say, but solar, of course, has limitations of being available only at daytime and not on nighttime. Wind could be available more in places where it's near the sea, or places that are high in altitude. So it's not always available to all places, but in most cases, both of these are available in many places. But for tidal and geothermal, these are not widely available. These are limited, even though both are a good source of renewable energy. And even though we know that they have a lot of potential, but they are not widely available to all places. For example, geothermal is only available to some places where there are a lot, for example, in the Philippines or in Australia, but not in many parts of the world. So this is quite limited. Another thing is, though there is there is a viable, no, there is a large amount of resources, but if you don't have the technology to harness that resource, then there's no meaning to it as well. It's gonna be a challenge, regardless of how extensive that resource may be. Like for example, for solar photovoltaic, solar PV, which is, as you know, is the conversion of is the this one is a technology to convert solar light into electricity directly. So in this case, since the PV, the cells are usually made of CIGS materials like copper, indium, gallium, and selenide, and these materials are quite rare elements, and of course expensive. So the availability is there, but we don't have that much extensive resource because they are rare elements. Like for example, if we look at this table here, um, to produce a 1 gigawatt of power for the use of solar cells, you need about 90 tons of indium, 30 tons of gallium, and 180 tons of selenium. Of course, if you compare it to power the whole of the world needs, then you get to need more of these materials. But if you compare only to the production or the production of these elements here that is needed or that are needed for the solar PV, you can see that in fact it's only 140 tons in world production. And you can see from here you need 90 tons for 1 gigawatt. So it means that you can only produce possibly more than 1 gigawatt of solar PV or solar cells from this one. So it's not enough. This is just quite a small amount if you compare it as a world requirement. So that's why there's the element problem as well. So it's rare and it's not widely available. And if there's a resource, there's also it's not easy to be harnessed as well. So the viable technology is needed to for harnessing these kind of resources. Of course, there are newer materials now, so solar PV that can be used to increase the efficiency and also making sure that the new materials are also available. Another example is lithium. Lithium that is used for rechargeable batteries. So as you know, your mobile phones, we use lithium for batteries, and so it's widely used. Actually, this material is widely used and is needed for such kind of batteries. But the resources available now are not that much anymore. So we have sort of a scarcity in lithium. But there's a new source for that from seawater. Seawater has small amounts of lithium in the as a content of a seawater. But if you put together all the volume of seawater in the world, then there is a very big resource for lithium actually from seawater. The only problem with this one is we don't have a viable technology to harness or extract lithium from seawater directly. It's not available at this time, and we are still at the beginning stage of research to enable a lithium extraction from seawater. So using membranes or some adsorption. So these are still at the early stage. So even though we cited a new resource for lithium, but the viable technology is not there yet. So we have limitations, resource limitation, and non-existence of viable technology to utilize the resource. So the second barrier is on the availability of necessary technology, and this is termed as technological limitation. So it's pretty much what I've already mentioned a while ago in the previous slide, that the technological barrier inhibits the development of resource. So as I mentioned, lithium is for one example that there's no such technology to recover the resource yet, or or sometimes the lack of suitable technology infrastructure could be a result of lack of basic scientific knowledge. So in fact, if we have not done some fundamental research yet on a specific technology, then we don't really understand how it works or what the mechanism is. And we need this basic scientific knowledge in order for us to apply this knowledge for a practical and economical way. One example of that one is, for example, the solar PV again. So what is the limitation of solar PV? At this point in time, the solar PV is usually in the range, the efficiency of solar PV is the range of 12, even to 12 to 25%. The highest one is the 45%, but it's using a very difficult material to look for, and so it's not widely, and also expensive, so it's not widely available. So in this case, a lot of research are still being done on what sort of new material or new design that could increase the efficiency, higher efficiency, or better yet, to increase even to 45% as long as we have cheaper materials or better design and long-lasting design. So that is still needed. Basic scientific research is needed to improve that one. So another example is the limitation of good membrane design for pressure retarded osmosis, which exploits the salinity gradient or osmotic energy of two different solutions. Like for example, in this case, we have a semi-permeable membrane that is needed, that is put in between two different solutions of different concentrations. One is a diluted solution and the other one is a more concentrated solution. We can use, for example, seawater here and like a fresh water from this side. And what happens is, because of the membrane properties and characteristics, and because of the osmotic pressure difference based on the concentration of each solution, the diluted side will allow the water to pass through, will go through the membrane for a partially, or for a semi-permeable membrane to go to the other side, which is more concentrated, to the draw solution. So this draw solution will now become diluted and it will increase its volume. So once the volume is increased, it will now increase its volumetric water flow and then drive and runs through a hydro turbine. And this hydro turbine will turn and then it will now generate electricity. Of course, at this point, the amount of energy that is produced from here is quite low still, but it shows the potential of production of energy as a way of alternative way of producing energy. Now, this one is still at the initial stage of research, and because of the lack of appropriate membrane, and of course, still the process optimization is still lacking there, there is a lack of basic scientific research yet at this point in time. So we're still at the stage of more in-depth research and perhaps later on for a pilot scale research so that we'll be able to understand the whole of the mechanism. We'll be able to have a good membrane, which is lacking at this point as a technological limitation, so that we can produce the kind of power or energy that we want to achieve in this process. Another challenge for the sustainable energy development is on the consideration of economic factors. And I think this is a very important aspect because the ultimate commercialization of energy technology requires to consider this one, the economics, because it's about money. It's a major factor in determining its viability. If you don't make a profit in your energy technology, then there's no use of doing such technology. And one must make sure that it's quite competitive and the cost should be at par or even cheaper compared to the other energy technologies in order for it to be attractive to producers and consumers. So if you have a very expensive energy cost, then the consumers would possibly not buy it. Okay, so it has to be really competitive. And in order for this technology to work on in terms of economics, we have to consider three components: the cost of fuel, the cost of the infrastructure operation and maintenance, and also the capital cost, which is amortized over its lifetime. And so if you compare the different costs of infrastructure here, coal seems to be the cheapest one in comparison with other energy technologies, especially with solar PV here, geothermal process, nuclear fission is here. And it's mainly because coal has been a very mature technology now, and they have the blueprint already on making this infrastructure. They have the equipment and the facility and the materials to provide for the cost of infrastructure construction. So this is mainly cheaper compared to the other ones. And this one, the solar PV, still needs some expensive rare elements, and so that's why it's also expensive in its infrastructure as well, and even for solar PV as well, and including the CSP, the concentrated solar power. And for the fuel and operating costs, they are also quite significant for others and not significant for others, or not needed for others. So example for this, in terms of coal, natural gas, and nuclear, they need fuel for that, and so there's a cost in relation to that fuel need. But for other renewable energies, for example, hydroelectric, wind, and solar, mainly they don't need any fuel for this one. So the fuel cost is low for this one, and fuel cost is additional cost for fossil fuel generation. And operating cost is also different for various energy technologies. Mainly hydropower may not need much operating cost, but nuclear is another one that may be considering a big cost in terms of its waste disposal, because you need to make sure that disposal of nuclear waste would be safe, and so you need to have a good strategy to do that, and it entails a lot of cost as well. When we talk about energy technologies, the money involved can be broken down into three major parts. So the number one is the capital to build the plant. So we need a capital that is needed for the construction of the plant. The second one is the operation and maintenance fund. So this is the money to basically from the net itself is for the operation and the maintenance of the plant. And the last one would be the revenue from selling the energy generated. So these are the three main parts of the economics of energy technology. In order for us to properly compare different energy technologies, we need to compare it on the basis of its net present value. So, for example, in investing and in discounting, whatever money that we invest today at a fixed annual interest will actually increase in its value every year, right? So year after year, there's an interest and it will increase its value of your investment. But on the other hand, when we look at the revenue that is received in the future, for example, in 30 years time, the value of that money in the future is actually worth less than the revenue or value received today. So if we put that value in from the future towards today, it's basically less compared to the future. So what we do here is reducing the future revenue to its present value is what we call as a discounted cash flow analysis. So we're trying to put the future value into the present value. This is particularly important when the discounting is particularly important when revenue is expected over many years, like the case of renewable energy, like the wind turbine. So let's take a look on how to calculate the present value of the future revenue. So let's suppose that the A is a fixed revenue of A. So every year you have a fixed revenue of A. And the present value VP of the revenue obtained over years is given by this equation. So VP is the present value, V sub P. A is the annual fixed revenue for a number of years. And R is the discount rate. It's basically interest rate, but based from the future. So it's called the discount rate if it's using discounting analysis. So R is the discount rate, and N is the number of years. So for example, the revenue for is after 30 years, so we can put 30 years there. So basically, we can use this formula to work out what is the present value of a revenue at a certain time in the future. So let's take, for example, this situation here. Once we have a revenue or discount rate of 5% given here, and we are looking at a number after 30 years of revenue making. So after 30 years in the future, we're looking at this technology, and then we have an annual revenue of, or a fixed revenue of $100,000. So the question for this one is to find out what is the present value of this business here, or in this situation of a technology. So from there, we can get from this equation here, V sub P is equals to A times 1 minus 1 plus R powered to the negative N over all over R. So we have given already for the A as the annual revenue is 100,000. And then we see that the R is basically 1 plus R here is 1.05, which is 5%, and raised to the power of 30, which is 30 years. And then we have another R here, which is 0.05 as 5%. We get the present value of this technology, of this energy technology at 1,500,000. Now, if you compare this one to the situation where you only counted, like if we have 30 years of life of that energy technology and your annual revenue is 100,000, you can automatically just multiply this one for 30 years, right? So 30 times 100,000, you get 3 million of the value of your future revenue. But this one is bigger, it's double of what we have achieved, because this one doesn't really involve a discount rate. So this is a wrong information if we put this value as a present value. So the present value is actually lower than the future value, because of course, if we put the value now as a present value, you can put interest rate to achieve the actual value in the future. All right. So this is now the calculation of V sub P, or the present value. So to continue from the previous slide, we have the present value of V sub P that we have calculated already, around $1.5 million. But we also need that V sub P is the present value of your revenue in the future. All right. So this is not the net present value. The net present value is basically the return after the subtracting the initial capital. So once we have the present value of your revenue after 30 years, then if we subtract it one with your capital investment, the net present value is basically is your actual revenue after 30 years. Okay, it's the return of investment after 30 years. This is, if this is positive here, it means that your rate of return is good and you have a really good investment. So you are not losing. So if it's negative, it means that you are losing after 30 years. So it's not a good investment. So in order to get the net present value, you need to subtract the capital from the present value of your revenue. For example, if the capital is $1 million, and based on our earlier example, the present value of that was given as $1.5 million, right? $1,537,245, which is the V sub P, and then minus the capital of your investment. And so you get around $537,000 as a positive net present value. So this signifies that this is your rate of return, and your investment was good because you are going to earn money from your investment. In order for us to properly compare the economics of different energy technologies, for example, fossil energy technology versus various renewable energy technologies like solar energy, wind energy, in order for us to compare this on a more level playing field or equal footing, we can actually equate, or we can actually calculate the annual revenue that would give zero net present value. So what will be the A cost, which is the annual revenue, so that the net present value is at zero. So if we equate VNP as zero, then we are putting all the different energy technologies on equal footing. Everything is in zero now. So basically, from this equation here, instead of the annual revenue based on the present value, we now have A sub cost, which is now the revenue based on the zero net present value. So this A cost now times 1 minus 1 plus R to the power of negative n over R minus the capital is equal to 0. So since this is 0, then our equation, it becomes VNP, V sub NP is 0. Then we will have this term now, and capital will go to this side. All right, so it becomes this term is equal to capital. So if we now rearrange everything and we want to take and we want to solve for the annual revenue at 0 for the zero net present value, we can rearrange this equation. Okay, by rearranging equation, this part here, this term over here, will go down on the capital. So we have C sub capital times R, which is this one, is R, times R over this term over here. All right. So let's say, for example, if we have given, for example, in our previous example here, the capital was 1 million. So we can put 1 million as capital here. All right. And our R was 5%. It was given before. So the discount rate was 0.05. And then we can also put 0.05 here. And the number of years was 30 years. So from here, the annual revenue is equal to 65,051. This is at the situation where this cost is actually solved at the zero net present value. So that is the annual revenue cost now. So now from here, we can then solve for what we call as levelized cost of energy, or LCOE. So levelized cost of energy. Please remember this term because this is important in order for us to compare the different cost of different energy technologies. So this LCOE for this equation is ignoring the operations and maintenance part. We only care about the manufacturer and installation cost. All right. There's another equation. It's a more complicated equation. We can enter the operations and maintenance cost, but in this case, we only make it simplify. We simplify it, and then we only take into consideration the manufacturing and installation cost as capital cost. Okay, so this is the capital now. So to solve LCOE, we already solved the annual revenue. Okay, see the money over here divided by the energy produced per year in terms of kilowatt hour. All right, so you have money per energy produced. So the actual unit for LCOE is dollars per kilowatt hour. All right. So what does it mean? It means that you need this much money in order to produce this much energy. So when you have less money to produce energy, it means it's cheaper, right? So for LCOE, the lower the value of LCOE, the better for, or the more competitive it is compared to other energy technologies. All right, so we are trying to see and compare different LCOEs of different energy technologies. So let's try to continue our previous example. So for example here, if we are given more additional details, if rated power is 2 megawatts of your specific energy at a capacity factor of 20%, then we need to find what is the LCOE of your energy technology. All right. So with this one, based from the definition of capacity factor or CF is equal to the annual energy output of your energy technology divided by the annual energy output at the rated power. All right. So in this term, it is it is given in power, so we can convert this one in energy to get the kilowatt hour. So in this case, since we want to get the annual energy output, so we can just multiply capacity factor times the rated power. Okay, so CF times the rated power is actually the annual energy output. So that's why in our equation here, this is the annual energy output is equal to the rated power times capacity factor from this equation here. And then we convert this one into energy times 365 days in a year times 24 hours in a day, cancel the days. Then we will get hour and kilowatt. So it becomes kilowatt hour per year or annually. So if we calculate this one, the annual energy generation or production is 3.5 times 10 to the 6 kilowatt hour. So now we have the annual energy generation. So basically we can solve for LCOE. So LCOE is basically A sub cost over the energy generation. So 65,000 from here, 65,000 divided by this annual energy production, 3.5 times 10 to the 6 kilowatt hour. And so the answer would be 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour. So this is now the LCOE. So these are some examples of the various LCOE of the different energy technologies, from fossil fuel like coal, gas, and then to some of the renewable energies. So what we can see from this table is this part is your LCOE in terms of the dollars per megawatt hour of energy, the lifetime of projected lifetime of each energy technology, the capital cost, and also the capacity factor. As I mentioned to you, capacity factor is basically the actual energy produced over the energy at rated power or rated energy. So that is the capacity factor. And of course, you have fuel that is needed as well for operations, the operations and maintenance or other things during operation and maintenance. Two of these one are operations and maintenance. So if you can look at the fuel, of course, you can see that most of the renewable energy or all of the renewable energies do not need any fuel for the operation, right? So coal needs fuel, gas needs fuel, and even nuclear reactor needs fuel, but renewable energies do not need any fuel. But of course, they have separate operations and maintenance. So it depends on how you calculate LCOE, and I think in this table, LCOE was calculated together with all of these factors here, all of these terms: the fuel, operations and maintenance, as well as capital. So LCOE from this example, these are some of the lowest cost estimates. It doesn't mean these are the actual estimates now, but if you can see, coal has relatively, and I mean the fossil fuel has relatively the cheaper LCOE compared to the other renewable energies, except for the wind or onshore, which has quite a low LCOE, which is quite competitive now. The CSP is still pretty high. The concentrated solar power storage is pretty high. The solar PV at home is still high. And the lifetime, if you comparison for this one, coal has quite a long lifetime of their use. Comparison to others here, wind has only 20 years. The capital as well is pretty big for the CSP. It's a very big capital. Nuclear has a very big capital. Capacity factor is very high for coal and also for nuclear, of 90% for that. The other like PV is only 30% capacity factor. The PV home is like 25, 20 to 25%. And of course, we can also differentiate fuel. So what this means is that the renewable energy technologies now are getting more competitive, but still coal is still at a cheaper range in most of the time. So we are still trying to improve our, the cost of our energy production based on renewable energy technologies. Another one is the consideration of social factors. This is important because it talks about how the public perceive about a certain technology. So the public perception of technology or energy is influenced by economics. Of course, economics is very important, the how cheap the energy is or how affordable that is. Comfort as well. The safety of technology is very, very important. Environmental factors or the way it affects the environment, and even aesthetics, the way it looks or how beautiful it looks. So in this case, for example, let's say this graph here, it talks about the safety. If you can see, this is the public approval of a nuclear power plant. So in this case, the approval of nuclear power plant started with a very high approval in 1980s because it came from the energy crisis in 1970s. And so the approval of alternative energy is quite high. And then suddenly there's a drop here in this area here. The yellow one is the approval, and the opposed one is this one. And then suddenly at this point here, the Chernobyl accident or incident, nuclear incident in 1986 in Ukraine happened. And so that because of that incident, so people are now afraid of the safety because they're saying that the nuclear power is dangerous, is not safe. So that's why the approval rating went down in this time and the opposed went up. But after some time, the approval rating slowly is getting higher and higher again until such time that it's increased so much in 2010 and until such time at this point as well. So what happened is that every after an incident, there will be a stricter and more stricter laws and designs and safety precautions to a certain technology. So that's why people started to trust again the system, so started to trust the design, started to trust the technology because of more stringent practices and more stringent guidelines to follow in order to provide the safest possible way of dealing with technology. So that's why it has also increased the favor for the public. Another example of the effect of incident to the public approval is what happened in Japan, in Fukushima. So when there was a problem with their nuclear reactor, and then subsequently there is an earthquake and tsunami, then it happened in March. And so just before, was just a month after that, the support is still high. And then they realized the effect of the earthquake and tsunami, and then the support is slowly getting lower and lower in June. So in any incident that happens, the public support also quickly changes its stance. All right. Another one example of the public perception of energy is about the aesthetics, for example. So wind turbines, it depends on who you talk to, but in most likeliness, the wind farms look quite good in terms of how it looks like. But some people, they don't like them in to be near their houses because they feel that they are not safe enough. So some people are saying that NIMBY is more of saying not in my backyard. So not in my backyard is what people are trying to preach to others about wind turbines, for example. Some people are very, very really strict in saying that banana is another acronym for build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So it's really more a stricter view of not allowing anything to be built just nearby their own houses or nearby their own livelihood. So these are based on the public perception as well, because they are also concerned about the environmental effects of such um, energy technology. For wind, some people are saying that it is damaging the environment because it's killing birds, and also it's a lot of accidents, and it's very dangerous if there is an accident because it's a very big turbine. And so this is a public perception. But once we try to really give them the statistics about accidents, we tell them about potential increase of the land because of the presence of wind farms. This could also affect the way people perceive this kind of energy technology. Another example is geothermal, which can possibly uh, uh, affect or contribute to earthquake. And so this is also another way of saying that public safety is also important for the society to consider. It's very, very important for them. So social, the stakeholders are very, very strong ones. So once they say they don't want it and a lot of voices will support them, in most likelihood, this project that you are trying to do will not push through unless you do a very good stakeholder engagement with them. So public opinion can influence the development of certain technologies and government energy policy. So it's a very strong voice from a very influential stakeholder as well. Also, as I mentioned here, the nuclear energy has generated more public interest than most other energy approaches, but also because of the incidences and that happened before. So it has also garnered a lot of public interest, incidents as well as its capacity to generate good amount of energy. It is also interesting to see what matters most for many people. And one major factor is the economics. The cost is a major factor for public, of course, because it relates to money, how much we can afford. So based on a survey that was done in somewhere in the European Union poll, it says that the first one, the highest vote, went to the affordability. Guaranteeing low prices for consumers is the biggest factor or major factor for any energy development. And also here is another high one is protecting the environment. Of course, this energy security is also high, having a continuous supply of energy. But if you go down here, this becomes lower and lower now. The fighting for global warming is getting lower, and this is saying that the cost of energy is still the number one factor for the public approval. And interestingly, if you look at the public preference for what kind of energy technologies they would like to have, the solar energy tops the list. About more than 80% of them approve or in favor of solar energy. And if you look at the list here, in fact, the top five are part, or top four are in renewable energy. And so the public opinion is that despite of the cost, the importance of cost, they also would like to see more uptake of renewable energy technologies. And you can see that the fossil fuels are lower in terms of favor from the public. And so now we are looking at a more uptake of the renewable energy sources, but at the same time, we have to balance that one to be more affordable to the public. And that's a bit of a challenge as well in making sure that the advanced technologies are good enough to make it more widely available with more materials that are affordable to make, and the LCOE will be much lower as well compared to the more mature ones like the fossil fuel energies. Another challenge for this, another factor is on the environmental impact of the energy technology. So in this case, there's a question of, does renewable energy have negative impact to the environment? Because so far as we think of renewable energy, we always thought it's a very clean energy. In fact, during operation, these renewable energy sources are quite clean, but we forgot about some of the hidden contribution to greenhouse gas emissions as well. So this the contribution could be in two ways from renewable energy sources. The first one is on during the processing of materials and manufacturing of the infrastructure, because once you use materials as well, it has accompanying CO2 emission. It could be substantial due to low energy density of renewable energy sources. So it means that we may need more materials and on bigger scale because of the energy density of these renewable energy sources are quite low. So we need to make it more volume or more area in order to compensate for the low energy density. And the other way to contribute for greenhouse gas is during the operation of the facility, which in this case, usually this is pretty small for most of the renewable energy technologies. So if you look at some of the CO2 emissions, for example, on various sources of energy, of course, coal has the highest one, which is around almost 1,000 CO2 kilogram per megawatt hour of CO2 that is produced during the for per unit of electrical energy. But for solar photovoltaic as well, it also still releases a CO2 due to the use of intensive materials. Some materials are rare metals or rare elements, and they need some really high technology to manufacture to make the solar cells for manufacturing. And besides, when you do this, they still generate very small amount of power, and so that's why the energy density is quite small. So still, if you compare to coal, solar PV is still low, but then again, it's not zero CO2 emissions. So we have to rethink about our thinking of a pure, clean, a very clean renewable energy source, because when you use a material, then you still use CO2 emission, or you still produce CO2 emissions overall. And wind is also a lower case. You use some materials like the wind stand or the foundation of the wind. Use some metals or some concrete to do this foundation as well, or the wind turbine blades. The blades are made of metals, and also hydro can have the concretes, making the dams, the structure there needs a lot of concrete. So it's also using a lot of materials that has relation to CO2 emissions as well. So please remember that, in fact, this is not really purely clean energy, but then if in comparison to coal, this is much lower. So that's why it's not negligible, but much lower compared to coal emissions. The political factors are also a bit of a challenge for sustainable energy development because we're dealing with politics here now. The decisions of politicians are based on the energy policy and of the nation, as well as on the individual's effort to defend the interests of its own people. So it's basically there's a national policy and there's also an individual um, way of thinking as long as they can defend the interests of the people that they are representing. So these policy are based on energy generation, transmission and use, the also policy on efficiency and environmental standards. There are a lot of policies now on subsidies, like for example on solar rebate before, solar rebate and some renewable energy target funds, example, incentives. We have some solar energy incentives as well, tax exemptions, and the like to promote improved energy utilization, especially for renewable energy. We fund some programs for energy-related research and development, like ARENA is providing a number of projects that is from the government to have this research on energy for research and development about energy, and some treaties and agreements as well, like emission trading between countries, or even for business of trade of the energy resource like coal to other countries. So these are different policies from energy policies from various governments and countries. So the details of energy policies usually depend on the following factors here. It depends on the economy, climate, geography, natural resources, and population. So in our case in Australia, for example, the energy policies are towards still on the side of the use of coal because it refers to our economy. It's very related to our economy. The coal, Australia is basically exporting coal as the fourth largest has the fourth largest reserves of coal, and it has a very big impact on the economy of Australia. So that's why the policy is still quite leaning towards coal at this point in time. But of course, there's a slow uptake of renewable energy sources these days already. But it really depends on whose party is on the leadership. Of course, they have different interests. They have different energy policies as well. And overall, the decision making will depend on these five different factors. Climate is another important aspect as well. Geography and the resources that you have. So if you don't have much resources, so your policy will also be different from others, and population as well. So overall, if you have large land area, you have low population, but you have substantial resources and good economy. So in this situation, most probably policy can go for more energy independence because you have a lot of resources that can possibly support the low population. And so that's not, and you have a good economy. So it means that there's a potential for this to be sustainable and can be independent in terms of energy or being secured. But if you have a small land area and you have large population density, so that means the number of people per area, a certain area, and you have few resources. So in this case, your policy would probably direct you to be more friendly with other countries because you might need or you will need their support in the supply of energy. This is not able to go for independence yet because you don't have the resources, you have a lot of population, and your area is not enough as well. So it really depends on situation, on how the politics will decide on your policy, of your direction of your energy future or your energy mix. So in Australia as well, we have considered to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions based on the agreement in Paris Agreement. So policy wise, the government also made some efforts in making sure they have money to provide for some funding or incentives given to industries or to people in order for them to actually help in reducing the CO2 emissions. So overall, energy policy should be environmentally sound, it should be feasible in terms of technology, and it should be affordable towards a more sustainable energy future. The last challenge that we are going to discuss is on the integration of this new technology with existing technology or existing infrastructure. Because we hear a lot of times that people are clamoring that right now should be the time to change directly into renewable energy sources. But we need to ask if we are already ready to suddenly change into renewable energy sources. Because this is not like a magic thing that you can just do it directly unless you are ready. So the future energy mix, it is clear that changes must be made. We need to make, and we know that fossil fuel cannot continue that very long. But at least we need to prepare as well. So we need changes has to be made in how we produce and utilize energy. And the development of new technologies require development of new infrastructure. So just think about it. If you are using now gasoline stations, for example, so we have gasoline stations because most of our cars are fossil fuel based, and so there's a lot of gasoline stations. So suddenly, if the government says, okay, let's move on to electric cars or hydrogen powered cars. So in order to go to this new direction, we must ensure that we have electric charging or hydrogen stations. Otherwise, if we just put people to use electric cars and we don't have enough charging stations like this one, then there's a very big chance of disruption because we are not prepared to transition directly to that kind of situation, right? So transitions between technologies need to avoid disruptions. Another example is for oil production. So instead of, or is it related with this one, instead of producing oil, we need to produce battery now so that it can be incorporated in your vehicles. So without thinking about how are we going to have this battery production facility, and if ever we can automatically change this facility into battery production, which is not possible for this kind of technology, then there will be some major disruptions. Of course, you can think of other things that may happen. Like, for example, can we really just transition, for example, from a fossil fuel power plant? Can we use that facility to enable to be transitioned into a renewable energy source? It's not, for example, it's different. The solar energy is different mechanism compared to the power plant. So this is not automatic transitioning. So we need to prepare the infrastructure. Also, there's a concern on connecting to electricity grid from renewable energy sources. Of this is a big concern because most of our renewable energy sources are intermittent. They don't provide a consistent flow of energy or consistent supply of energy because wind doesn't really flow all the time. The solar the sunlight doesn't really shine all the time. The rain doesn't come all the time for hydro power, and so there are a number of challenges and issues as well to consider before we transition to more renewable energy. So in any case, the long-term goal of eliminating fossil fuels will require the intelligent control of energy production and distribution facilities to ensure reliable supply. So the key word is reliable supply. So this one means that we need to think properly on transitioning and integrating our new technology and how do we do that so that we lessen the disruptions on our everyday life because without this because it's not easy to directly transition to from one technology to another technology without preparing the infrastructure. So to recap, these are the challenges for sustainable energy development. We talk about limitations on resources and technology. We talk about the importance of money and making profit, the importance of making sure that the public is actually approving of the technology, and of course, it's appealing to them. It means that they are affordable as well and safe, and also the issue of the environmental impact, not only on the safety side or not only on the impact on the CO2 emissions, the thinking that renewable energy are zero CO2 emissions. We have to change that thinking and consider it in our future decision making as well, in terms of design of new materials and technologies to improve the technologies present for renewable energy technology, and also to consider the policies that the politicians and the government are making, which direction they are going, because some people may invest in renewable energy only to realize that the government has a different strategy. If the government policy is towards the the support of fossil fuel, then investing in renewable energy would be not good. So that's why we have to consider the political factors as well. And lastly, the integration of this new technology has to be highly considered to avoid disruptions in the energy supply. And all of this needs to be considered before in the design of approach for our sustainable energy future. And once all considerations are done, it will really contribute good enough for making sure that to achieve, mostly likely achieve our sustainable energy dream. So thank you for this. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me and email me for clarifications.